Hello everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to this tutorial on how to do terraforming in Minecraft. This has been a long requested video for me to do, particularly among those of you who have been following along with the Grian's Mansion tutorial series that I recently finished. So now that I finished that, I finally have time to do this video, so let's jump right on in and start this tutorial. The first step in any large-scale terraforming project is setting your high points. Now I say large scale because what I'm talking about there is like if you're building a mountain or some sort of large cliff, then you want to begin by figuring out where the high points of the peak of the mountain or the top edge of that cliff is going to be. Now if this is a smaller scale project, like just throwing in a bunch of dirt around your base and just trying to make like the land around your base look a little bit more natural, then you can skip this step. You don't need to build pillars like this to set your high points. You can go straight on to the next step, which is going to be building a bit of an outline of the land you want to create. But for any large scale project, so I'm talking mountains here, I'm talking cliffs here, you need to set your high points. So with a mountain, that's probably going to be in the form of a single pillar like this, going up to where the top there is. That is going to be the peak of our mountain. If I turn around here, if you're building some sort of cliff, it's going to look a little bit more like this. You're going to have multiple high points along the cliff, and you can see that this central one is the highest. It's also the closest to me. If I come in closer here, you can see how going out from the central part of this cliff, it's not only going slightly down and getting a little bit shorter as we get towards the sides, it's also generally going slightly back, so that this tallest point is also the most protruding out point of that cliff. Once you have decided where the high points of your terraforming build are going to be, or if you're doing a smaller scale one that does not require that, then your next step is to create a bit of an outline, which is going to eventually take the form of kind of like a wireframe general shape to your build. So I have begun that here on this mountain that we're going to have, and as you can see, I've just done one line here and it's going up fairly gentle, so this is going to probably kind of be like a ridge starting from over there and coming up to here. Now there's a step that goes along with this, which is also kind of deciding on your block palette. You need to do this at this early stage at the same time as you're building this outline. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I am just pretty much going to be using stone for all of it. But if I was doing a more serious terraforming project in one of my actual worlds, I would probably want to add in a bit more variety to this. So I'd probably add in some andesite and cobblestone in a grey block palette for some terraforming of a mountain like this. I might also think about some deep slate if I want to get some slightly darker patches in there. And also diorite and granite can work really nicely if they're done well, adding a little bit more variety to that palette. It's very important when you're building this outline to try and avoid any straight lines. As you can see from this bit that I've started off with here, I haven't started on like a block, say here, which is in a straight line with the peak of that mountain. I've come off to the side and I'm going not just at a diagonal, but not even a straight diagonal. It kind of curves around as I've done it. It's also important as you do this, you don't want to do big sections at a time and then check it and find you've done it completely wrong. Place only a few blocks at a time and check it very frequently as you're going. So to show you what I mean by this, I'm going to start off with another corner of the mountain here, and I think I want this corner to be a bit steeper than that ridge I've started off with over there. So I'm going to come in a lot closer, still not in a straight line, I'm at a diagonal here, not in one of the four cardinal directions from this tower. So I'm going to come in reasonably close there. I'm going to build in a couple of blocks up and I'm going to have a look at where I am. So I think I need to come in a little bit closer to it now, build a few more blocks up, check again where I'm at in relation to the peak there. So I think I'm going to come this way now, a couple of blocks, come that way again, a couple of blocks up, and I'm going to keep doing this. Now I'm actually starting to look maybe a little bit closer there, so I'm going to go slightly less steep for these next few. Okay, how am I looking there? Still good, not looking too straight and man-made, but I can see here that if I go from there, I'm definitely going to need to come in a little bit less steep than what I've done here, because if I follow that line up, I'm ending up way above my peak. So I'm definitely going to need to continue a little bit more, slightly less steep there, and let's check again. Okay, we're getting there, it's looking pretty good. Just a few more here now, And there we go, that is now touching. So we have our next corner built, and I'm going to keep on with that kind of process around until I've got a few more of these lines. And now if I jump to a little bit later in this process, this is the kind of wireframe outline that we are looking for. So you can see on this mountain, I've kind of got this big long ridge that comes up there, not super steep. This side here also not quite as long as this one, but also not super steep. But then over this side, this is kind of like the really steep face out. It's going to be more of a cliff, and it's going to be like almost like a little steep ridge coming down there. So these are actually going to be two ridges with this little bit coming in between them like that. Same sort of story over this side. And then spinning around, this is what the outline of a cliff will look like. I've basically got these lines going up to those points we marked earlier, and then similarly to the way I've done the outline of the bottom of this mountain, we have the outline of where the bottom and then also the top of that cliff goes. Now the next stage from here is to take this outline, and at the moment you can see it's very basic, like the mountain here. We just have these four corners coming up. We need to make this a little bit more detailed. So I'm going to do the same sort of process that I just showed you for these ones, just building up a little bit of a time, checking myself, build up a little bit more, check myself again. But I'm going to now do it in between where I've done this. So I'll probably take that point just there and bring it up. I'll take some point along here, maybe even a couple of points of this one. So like maybe there and maybe kind of there-ish. Bring those up a little bit. Same on this side. And then I'll do a similar sort of thing over here. Basically just make more lines so that my outline is more detailed. While you are doing this stage of making the outline a bit more detailed, you can see I've made a start on that here, adding in these lines in between where those first ones we did were. You don't just want to add lines like this that go from the base to the peak. You also want to add some lines that will run like between, say, this one across to this one. So I might add one, say, that like starts from that corner. Now where am I going? I'm kind of going over there. So I want to go in this sort of direction. So like that, maybe? Yeah, I might move that in a little bit, but that's the kind of general thing you're looking for. I probably will move that. But that is what you're doing. You're going from one line over here and joining it up to the one next to it, and then I'll keep doing that around. So that is going to add in a lot more detail, and the same rules apply to these ones. You want to avoid your straight lines, and you want to make sure that you are checking where you're going every few blocks. So you basically don't end up doing exactly what I've just done there and making something which doesn't really look like it's going to fit with the rest of the shape of this mountain. And here we go, with adding in all of those little bits, we are aiming for something that looks a little bit like this. So you can see very much still a wireframe outline of the mountain, but with all these bits going across and between those initial bits that we did, there's quite a bit more detail here, and you can start to see a bit more of a detailed pattern and shape to the mountain here. And if we look across at the cliff we've got over here as well, I've also started putting some things in between those initial straight up bits that we put in. And again, like the mountain, you can see the little bit more shape that you can see starting to emerge here. So this is the kind of level we are aiming for at this particular stage. And with that all done, we are now at the next stage, which is filling in these gaps. So we start to produce an actual solid shape for ourselves. Now, when you have done this, you will have kind of naturally ended up segmenting it off into different sections. So you can look at that's a little section just there. And then this bit here would be another section. That's a section, and so on. So within each section, I'll be starting down here. I'm basically going to go backwards and forwards, kind of like a printer almost. So it's almost like I'm 3D printing this mountain at this stage, filling in those blocks. As you can see from my hotbar here, I've also put in a few different ones. So I'm going to quickly start randomizing those with an auto scroller I have here, so that as I start to fill this in like so, you can see it's going to place a bit of a random texture. So when I have filled in all of this, I'm actually going to have a bit of a texture to my build. Now you can see here as I'm placing this, I'm not being super precise. There is a little bit of haphazardness to the way I'm placing these, so that is going to create something that looks fairly natural. Like you can see here, there's not really too many big straight lines or big flat faces, so it doesn't look super man-made there. As you watch this time lapse of filling in all those gaps, notice how I don't always get it perfectly right the first time. I often make little tweaks, such as breaking a corner which looks a bit too unnatural and smoothing it out to keep the terraforming looking how I want. Now it's important that you guys regularly step back to check how it looks while you're doing this, as the more you build without checking, the harder it is going to be to correct it if you end up messing up. So all the gaps in both these two terrain features have now been filled in. You can see the cliff there and the mountain over here. And I would say I'm happy-ish with how they look. Like, in a sense, they could be both complete. I could leave it just here because they are both full, solid, completed terrain features. Neither of them looks particularly man-made. There's not really any pattern to them. They both look relatively natural, but they can be better. So the last stage I'm going to talk about here is adding some detail and making the structure blend in a little bit more with the terrain that is around it. I'm actually going to start over here with the cliff for this one. The first thing I'm going to do is sort out some stuff at the top, because in real life what you tend not to have with cliffs is ones that just go straight up, they rock, and then they just stop, still rock at the top. What cliffs tend to have at the top is they tend to have dirt and grass on the very top of them like this. So that is one of the things we're going to do on this cliff, and we don't want this dirt and grass to be fully flush like this. We actually want it to overhang slightly and kind of wrap down around the cliff like so. And now that I have built out a little bit more of that grass at the top, you can see a few features of how I've done this. There's obviously the overhang that I just mentioned there, adds a little bit of depth to that build. Also, if you look at the bottom of where I've done this dirt, it's not just level, it kind of hangs down almost in like stalactites made out of dirt there, a little bit haphazardly. And then the other thing, if you look at the top here, you can see the way it doesn't just go flat back from the edge of the cliff. There is a very gentle rise, it slopes slightly up away from the edge of that cliff, which is how you tend to have the tops of cliff in real life. The other thing I'm going to do to this cliff face here, to add a bit more detail onto the actual face of it, not just the top, is take some moss blocks, and where I have ledges, I'm going to take a moss block, pop a moss block there, and then bone meal it so that I turn these ledges into little green bits, because again, in real life, any time you have a ledge on a cliff, dirt tends to settle there and then plants grow in that dirt. So ledges on cliffs, not always, but often, tend to have a little bit of greenery on them, so that is what we are trying to emulate here by doing this. And that is pretty much it as far as the cliffs go. You can see by adding all those moss blocks across the face of it, adds a bit of colour and variety into the otherwise very blank grey looking face of the cliff. The other thing I've done here, as you can see, I've added in a few trees around the bottom, and what those trees do is they block a bit of the view of the bottom of that cliff, which helps disguise the point where the ground becomes the cliff, so that even in this super flat world where it's very, very pronounced that it's just flat, 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 and then up, even in this kind of extreme version of the world, those trees do actually help to hide and blend it in with this flat terrain around it. The mountain, I think, is going to be a bit easier than all of this, because mountains, as a general rule, are more extreme environments than these cliffs, which means they do not have as much life going on in them, which means they don't have all of this greenery that we need to worry about. The main aspect of detail you are going to want to focus on your mountain is, of course, all the snow that goes on top. Now, there's two ways you can place it. You can either just simply add snow blocks and snow layers on top of the stonework that you have already done. Alternatively, you can do it the way that I have done this, which was by replacing a lot of that stone with stone blocks and then placing a few snow layers on top of some other blocks as well. Now, I think that this is the best way to do it, because by replacing those blocks, you keep the shape of the mountain that you've built, and you don't end up placing a bunch of snow on top and then completely changing the shape of your mountain by doing that. Snow layers in particular are really great to use for this section because, as you can see, you can place several on top of one another, which allows you to have a lot of scope for getting a lot of variety in there in terms of the depth of that snow, which means it's great for getting a bit of texture onto your build, and not everything is just either one block or it's just not there at all. You can have kind of half a block, or even I don't know how many of these there are in a block, is it 5? But you see the point. You can get a lot of variety and texture into the build by doing this. When you're placing all your snow, it is worth thinking about the gradient of the slope that you are putting it on. If you think about a real mountain, then you do not have snow settling on very steep faces, but you do have a lot of snow settling where it is a bit flatter. So when I have put all of this snow on top of my mountain, you can see I've done a lot more kind of around this ridge and around this side of the mountain where it is nowhere near as steep, and around this side over here where it's a lot steeper. You can see there's a lot less snow. I have used far less snow blocks over here, and I've opted more for the snow layers just on top of a few blocks at the bottom of those cliffs there, but certainly no snow in these cliffs themselves, because in real life snow simply would not settle on something that steep. The other thing you're going to want to do with your mountain is make sure that it blends nicely into the terrain around it. It is quite unusual for a mountain to suddenly rise out of a very flat landscape like this. It would be more common for mountains to have foothills, so the ground gradually rises up into that mountainous area. So you can see I've started to do it here. Basically what you are doing for these foothills is the exact same process that we used to build up this mountain, except it is on a smaller scale, and we're going to be using dirt and grass as our main blocks instead of the stone. And then you'll end up with something that looks like this. So you can see it kind of rises up in a bit of a hill there and then slopes up, so it blends nicely into that mountain. And there we go. Now that I've done that around the mountain a little bit, you can see how even just on this small scale where I haven't gone out very far or really put any detail into it, like I've not put any plants or used bone meal to get grass, flowers and stuff and any of that on this grass, it's literally just the grass blocks. You can see that with this minimal amount that I've done here, it really helps by having this mountain rise up out of the grassland that is also rising with it. It helps the mountain feel a lot more grounded and like it's actually part of the land, as opposed to something that I've just plonked down on top of it. Well everyone, that is all I have for you for today on terraforming. Hopefully I have given you at least one piece of advice in this video that is going to help you to improve your terraforming in the future. We have looked at some ideas of how we can build better cliffs, and of course some ideas of how we can build better mountains. And if I'm going to leave you guys with one last piece of advice on terraforming, it is that no matter how detailed or comprehensive of a tutorial you watch, even if you go and find one that is much more in depth than this one I have given you here, that is only going to be a starting point for teaching you how to terraforming, and the single best way you guys can actually learn and improve your terraforming is simply by practice. So get out there and build as many mountains and cliffs and whatever other terrain features you can think of as you possibly can. Anyway, I really hope you guys all enjoyed that video on terraforming. If you did, hit the like button, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought, and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any future videos from me. Until next time, I've been Matt, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!